this was BET.
Dance up in here, baby.
And we're talking with Bob.
How we going, why yo?
Ground law, but don't confuse me with the law. No, but just confuse me with my paw, because I am the Birdman Jr. I ain't tripping, boy. I play the corner like Ripkin, boy, with the 40 cal Ripkin, boy, Ripple boy.
This is BET. Somewhere in between then and now, BET fell off as the go-to network for all things black. So how did BET fail the black audience? In this video, I want to cover 4 main topics, or 4 main reasons why I think BET fell off. Stay tuned. If you grew up in the 90s, you probably grew up watching a lot of music videos, and the #1 place to see all your favorite artists, music videos, interviews was BET. BET was like something just for us at the time. But over the years, BET has completely fell off. At this point, I think BET should just be called the Tyler Perry Network. Every time I flip past the channel, it's just reruns, and then there's like a million shows from Tyler Perry. I don't even know who still watches BET at this point. The BET Awards used to be a main attraction for the network, but now I didn't even know it was on just recently. Before we get into my 4 main points, I want to talk about a little bit of the history of BET. So from an article from blackpast.org, they talk about the early years of BET. BET premiered in 1980 modestly as a channel that ran 2 hours of weekly programming in select East Coast cities. By the end of the year, it extended its viewership throughout North America and the Caribbean, and expanded programming to 24 hours of news and entertainment. Most of its early entertainment consisted of music videos, reruns of old black situational comedies, and some original programs. The company lost money during its first several years, but began to turn profitable by the mid-1980s. It also initiated changes in its format. BET by 1985 began to diversify its programming, adding politically oriented news programs, comedy showcases. We all remember Comic View, talk shows, and sports features. The channel continued to flourish in the late 1990s with several news programs, including Our Voices and Lead Story. However, by 2002, as part of the restructuring, management switched its focus. So the acquisition by Viacom with BET made Bob Johnson the first black billionaire. Listen to Sumner Redstone on his view on how the BET deal went down and why they decided to acquire BET in the first place.
The case of BET was already making about $150 million a year. It has only 62 million subscribers. We knew we could get that to 70. And as you may or may not know, advertisers pay black media only 50% of what they pay white media, which is not fair. And we think we can change that.
Listen to Bob Johnson talk about how he started the channel and where he got the idea.
So I got the idea of doing BET when I was helping out a guy who was a lobbyist for the cable industry. I mean, he was trying to start his own channel. I was lobbying for the cable industry. He was a business guy. And he talked to me about his business model, which was a channel for the elderly. And so he had a special kind of data about the elderly buys certain products, the elderly consumes certain products, the elderly has different kind of lifestyles, the elderly is poorly depicted on television, all things that are unique to older people. And he was trying to start that kind of a channel. So I asked him, I said, can I borrow your business model? He said, sure. So wherever he had elderly, I crossed it out and put black. Black people have different buying habits, black people have different consumption patterns. Black people, watch television in different ways. Black people are not adequately depicted on television. So when you put all of that together, it just said, gee, let's start this channel BET. So
the first main reason why I think BET fell off is definitely had to be the change in ownership. When BET sold to Viacom back in 2001, there was a clear change, and it happened immediately. This to me was the beginning of the end for BET as we knew it. From this point on, changes were made. Layoffs were the most immediate change at BET following the merger. 50 employees were cut in March. An additional 15% of staffers were let go that July. CBS News took over the producing duties for a lot of BET's news network. BET Tonight News aired in 1996, hosted by Tavis Smiley. He interviewed major political figures and celebrities and discussed topics ranging from racial profiling and police brutality to R&B music and Hollywood gossip. Smiley hosted BET Tonight until 2001. The network announced that Smiley's contract would not be renewed. Robert Johnson, at the time, founder of BET, defended the decision, stating that Smiley had been fired because he sold an exclusive interview to ABC News without first offering it to BET, even though Smiley's contract with BET did not require him to do so. Now let's talk about Ed Gordon. He joined in 1988 as a full-time anchor of the weekly program BET News, which covered black social issues and popular culture. While Gordon worked at BET, his news staff had only around 20 people, and Gordon produced most of his interviews with only 1 or 2 assistants. On January 25, 1996, Gordon became the first journalist to interview former NFL star O.J. Simpson after he was acquitted of murder the previous year. Gordon and Smiley were huge personalities on the news front for BET, and I feel like it was a huge mistake for both of them to get cut. Also, you see other shows like Teen Summit that were also canceled. A lot of fans were shocked and disappointed when they heard AJ and Free were no longer going to be hosting probably one of BET's most popular shows, 106 in Park. But listen to Free talk about why she left the show.
One of the reasons I left was because they would not give me my mineral water. And every day I'm going to tell y'all a different reason.
On a more serious note, fans were shocked and disappointed when they found out that AJ and Free wouldn't return to 106 in Park. AJ had problems with his contract, suggesting that he never had a long-term deal put in place. Prior to being fired, he left the show for 3 months. Guest hosts would come in and fill in for him. For Free, there's a lot of different rumors as to why she was fired. One rumor suggested that she had a verse with the Yin Yang Twins that didn't really represent BET well. But overall, I think it was just her being difficult behind the scenes from what I read, that she was starting to become more of a diva and just asking for things that were kind of unreasonable to BET management. With that being said, those are some of the notable firings that happened around the same time as when Viacom took over. Shift in content. The criticism of BET started growing louder and louder after the sale of the network to Viacom. From that point on, the content changed. At this point, the news side of BET was cut and the staff was fired. However, by 2002, as part of the restructuring, management switched its focus to entertainment programs, primarily airing rap videos, while eliminating his news staff and canceling all of his news programs except for BET Nightly News. That program was later canceled in 2005. So the criticism of BET didn't just start in the 2000s, it actually began in the early 90s. See, BET was strapped with a lot of debt in the early 90s, and Bob Johnson was starting to feel pressure from his partners at HBO and some of the executives and other part owners of BET to kind of switch up the content. But Johnson never wanted BET to become considered like the black MTV. There was a constant battle to make music videos a dominant force on the network. The executives at BET wanted Johnson to show more music programming. During the 80s and into the 90s, BET wasn't that profitable. Bob Johnson needed to turn the channel around quickly. This quote from The $1 Billion Bet from one of the top executives over at BET at the time goes like this. Bob, you ought to seize this opportunity to start showing more black videos. Don Anderson from Time Inc. Early on, Bob resisted. He felt that music would cheapen the product. Johnson's view on the channel in the beginning was to develop more highbrow and thoughtful public service oriented programming. You can see the shows that BET was known for during the 90s that attempted to keep a high standard. John Malone, the channel's biggest investor from the beginning, had a clause in his contract. So the clause in John Malone's contract simply states BET's programming shall conform to the ordinary standards of good taste and decency prevailing in the communities in which BET serves. But John Malone pretty much took a hands-off approach with that clause, and he let Johnson kind of take the reins. And by the mid-90s, hip-hop and rap became the key moneymaker for the network. The programming went from 40% music videos to 60% music programming by 1996. Entering into the 2000s, the shift was clear. BET was a clear force in music. 70% of the channel's programming was music-related. and music accounted for 80% of the channel's annual cash flow. Johnson was frustrated with how BET was criticized for its programming, while MTV was praised.
Fuck BET. I'm gonna read a book.
Word got around, BET was evil.
Here's another piece from The $1 Billion Bet. It just talks about criticism that BET got from the black community. In Hollywood, where black writers, actors, and producers have for years felt left out of the mainstream business, BET was criticized for failing to create a major platform, and some performers who did get opportunities at BET still publicly lambasted the network for paying low wages. So that takes me back to the 106 & Park situation, where AJ pretty much had a problem with his contract. He felt like he wasn't getting paid enough. And also Free, she felt like the network didn't really care about what they needed and wanted just on a daily basis. She felt like they weren't getting that much respect as the host of 106 & Park. Johnson fired back. He argued that to run a profitable business by giving viewers what most of them wanted and doing it as cheaply as possible was his goal. If the black race happened to gain some social benefit from that, then fine. So Johnson defended himself, and he took the position that only a small elite class of people had problems with BET, but the 35 million African American consumers that watch BET rocked with them and supported the channel and loved the channel. Stop relating to the audience. This article from blackpast.org explains the growing criticism in the later part of the 2010s.
You know, BET is what it is. Everyone knows what it is. The question is, what are we going to do about it, you know?
BET faced a variety of prominent African-American critics, such as syndicated columnist George Curry, cartoonist and television producer Aaron Magruder, movie director Spike Lee, and former Syracuse University professor Boyce Watkins. These critics and others denounced BET's programming, claiming it promoted blatant sexism and anti-intellectualism. They also charged that featuring rap and hip-hop oriented programming along with comedy programs either intentionally or inadvertently promoted anti-black stereotypes. Now, to be fair, BET is owned by Viacom, which also owns VH1, and we all know the foolishness that's promoted over on that network, but somehow VH1 escaped that criticism. Another question I have is, how does BET address social issues that the black community is facing? So with no real news outlet left on BET to speak to these issues daily or even weekly, it's put into the hands of occasional news specials or town hall style shows to have a larger discussion. You can also find news segments that are 2 to 3 minutes long. I'm not sure if these are found on BET.com or streaming platforms, but the few segments that I found on YouTube didn't seem to really take the issues that seriously. And you'll see some artists or actors directly address issues in the music or during performances at the BET Awards. So these news specials only seem to pop up when there's a high-profile shooting of a black man by cops. Take, for instance, Justice for Us 2014. This was a town hall style special that appeared after the Mike Brown shooting, and also Justice Now that aired during 2020 after George Floyd and all the high profile shootings from 2020. Then there was a special called Black America's Fight. This special aired during the pandemic, which focused on the virus and just getting vaccinated. It was hosted by Gayle King.
Our urban communities, and we know our urban communities are disproportionately impacted by this virus because of the way it's so contagious.
Disproportionate is a word. And Anthony, part of the problem is early on there was a terrible rumor that black Americans could not get it.
Which, if you know, Gayle King really isn't in tune with the black audience of today, at least. And you can also take a look at some performances from artists like Kendrick Lamar, DaBaby, Lil Baby, and Meek Mill that do address some of the social issues during music performances. But the black community as a whole has issues that should be reported on daily. So let's talk about the BET Awards for a second. Where do we start? The BET Awards has gotten a lot of criticism in the last couple of years just for the production and, you know, the artists that are on there. This show has really kind of gone downhill. I personally didn't watch the show. The last time I watched the BET Awards completely had to be around 2014 or 2015, somewhere around the time when Nicki Minaj was winning awards year after year with no real competition. And around the time when Beyonce just stopped showing up for performances. The BET Awards is supposed to be BET's main event. It's the culmination and celebration of all things black. This show brings together the biggest stars from music, TV, sports, and film. My main issue with the show is that it's no longer memorable. Watch Mojo created a top 10 list of the top 10 moments from the award show, and all the moments were almost a decade ago, or beyond. Think about your favorite moments. Was it a recent moment from the last 3 to 5 years? The production of the show at times seems to be careless or thrown together, or just completely out of touch. Take this recent moment from the 2022 awards. Here's the headline from the Miami Herald: BET Awards, tribute to gun violence. Victims spark outrage. Are you kidding? So basically, and I'll leave a link to the article, but basically this is what happened. The sound of gunshots rung out before the location of each shooting filled the screen, ending with another gunshot before the screen went black. So it's a tribute to the people that died, and then also they wanted to bring attention to all the gun violence from this year. Check out some of the tweets from the viewers. So this got me thinking, who is producing this show? The 2022 awards was directed by Sandra Restrepo, pictured here. This is Sandra. She is very accomplished as a TV director. She specializes in live events and award show ceremonies. And here is last year's director from 2021 and 2020. You notice anything about the directors? The mishaps combined with the lackluster performances in the case of this year's Bad Boy tribute, which I saw on YouTube. Has probably led to the show's decline. Now, this just isn't my opinion. The ratings show that BET Awards have been in decline for a long time. Back in 2009 seems to be BET's most viewed show with 10.65 million viewers combined. And since then, it's just been on a steady decline, holding steady from 2010 to 2014 at around 7 million, and then a quick steep drop off in 2016 down to 4 million, 3 million, 2, 2, 1, and 1. This year's show had criticism from across the web.
To be honest, if I want to rank this as from like the top or lowest BET award show, this was the lowest. I think this was probably the worst award show I've ever seen. I think this is worse than even the pandemic where they had to do everything virtual. I think that was better than this.
That's what they want for us. The Strong Brothers don't get represented. Look at the goddamn awards. You tell me what strong black man that you'll be like, that's a great example of a leader. Did you see on that stage the shit pushed in awards?
So what's the future for BET? BET has partnered with Tyler Perry, Lena Waithe, Kenya Barris, and Lee Daniels. I think Tyler Perry is the most visible creator on BET right now. So from what I've seen on the channel recently, BET has leaned into more scripted television shows, attempting to compete with shows like Power. I don't think BET can ever really regain its spot as the culture's go-to network unless ownership changes. Or I think what they could do is have a position sort of like an A&R for record labels where they're constantly just scouring the internet for new talent and personalities. People from Instagram or YouTube. You know, I think that would be a way for BET to stay current. One thing I think BET dropped the ball on is podcasts. They should have been all over this with shows like The Breakfast Club, 85 South, Drink Champs, $1 Million Worth of Game. I think those shows should have had a home on BET. They need more original programming that tells the stories of our cultural icons. What they do well right now, I think miniseries like the Bobby Brown story, the New Edition stories, and some of the docuseries that you've seen in the last couple of years that focus on Master P, Death Row, the Rough Riders. If you look at the channel Vice and how they utilize journalism on that channel, I think that's something BET should have or could be doing right now. At the end of the day, you can't completely bring back music programming because we can just find that on YouTube anytime. To sum it all up, I'm just disappointed to see how the network has evolved into what it is today. BET will never be what it once was. You're not going to catch your favorite rappers freestyling in the basement. No countdowns with AJ and Free. No news reports on black issues with Ed Gordon or interviews with Tavis Smiley. All the content we were used to seeing is now scattered across the internet. And not to mention you have networks like Revolt and OWN who kind of just picked up the baton for where BET left off.